deepest part of being God. And so hip hop as a movement is colored with.
Did you know that the same man who preached peace, unity, and hip hop once nearly fought Biggie over a misquoted interview, had to be searched for weapons before a peace summit, and at one point actually kicked a rival off stage?
It was about to happen. Next thing you know, you just seen KRS come. Somebody punched one of the dudes on the side. KRS grabs dude.
At 59, KRS-One isn't just a hip-hop legend. He's a firestarter, a lyrical revolutionary, and behind the wisdom and lectures lies a long list of enemies. From stage invasions to summit showdowns, KRS's history of beef isn't just personal, it's philosophical, generational, and explosive. And the 6 artists he truly couldn't stand? Let's just say, it's not who you think. Let's start with number 6, Nelly. Back in 2002, Nelly was dominating the charts. His album Nellyville was a commercial juggernaut, spawning hits like Hot and Hera and Dilemma. You couldn't turn on the radio or TV without seeing him. He had the swagger, the charisma, and the brand deals to match. But to KRS-One, Nelly represented something far more dangerous, a threat to the soul of hip-hop. Meanwhile, Nelly was left wondering, why is this old school dude so deep in my business?
Why would KRS-One give a about what?
To KRS, rap had always been about consciousness, community, and lyrical integrity. His legacy wasn't built on club anthems, it was built on The Bridge Is Over, Sound of Da Police, and activism through rhymes. So when Nelly dropped a song called Number One with lyrics that seemed to brag about being the best, KRS didn't hear a party track. He heard a challenge. Or worse, a dismissal of everything he stood for. And so he struck back with surgical precision. His response, "Over here," pulled no punches. "You the number one target when the blast is done? I'm a teacher, Nelly. You're just the class clown." These weren't playful jabs. These were bars loaded with frustration, disillusionment, and a righteous fury, aimed at a younger generation that KRS felt was erasing the roots of the culture. But this wasn't just about 2 artists exchanging diss tracks. This was about a generational war, a collision between hip-hop's past and its future. On one side stood KRS-One, a man who believed hip-hop had a higher purpose. On the other, Nelly, a symbol of its mainstream success. One stood for substance. The other, in KRS's eyes, stood for style. The tension spilled into the public. In interviews, KRS-One clarified, it wasn't personal, it was cultural, but fans didn't buy that. To them, it felt deeply personal. Hip-hop radio hosts began debating it live on air. Callers picked sides. Some felt KRS was bitter, stuck in the past. Others believed Nelly had no business disrespecting a pioneer. Nelly, for his part, didn't back down. In interviews with BET and MTV, he addressed the feud with an air of cocky indifference. "I'm not gonna let nobody tell me how to make my music," he said. "Let the people decide who's number one." He even hinted that KRS was trying to stay relevant by starting beef. Behind the scenes, the hip-hop community was watching closely. Artists like Talib Kweli and Common sided with KRS, praising the importance of message in rap. Meanwhile, industry execs were betting on Nelly, who was racking up platinum plaques and crossover hits. The clash wasn't just philosophical, it was symbolic. This was the era when hip-hop was becoming global. Commercial success was redefining credibility, and KRS-One, the embodiment of hip-hop's conscious roots, was standing in the middle of that storm, unwilling to compromise. In retrospect, the feud marked a turning point. It exposed the widening gap between old-school authenticity and new-school appeal. It asked the uncomfortable question, could hip-hop still be revolutionary if it was also mainstream? Years later, when asked about the beef again, KRS-One was more reflective. "It's all love," he said in a 2017 interview. "But don't think I won't call it out when I see the culture getting diluted." Even Nelly, in a podcast appearance, downplayed the feud. "He did what he had to do. I did what I had to do." That's hip-hop. But the echoes of that feud still linger. It became a case study taught in college hip-hop courses, dissected in documentaries, and debated in barbershops across the country. It was more than a beef. It was a battle for the culture's soul. And the fact that both artists are still standing today, that's the craziest part. Because despite everything, this war didn't end with a winner. It ended with hip-hop evolving, and everyone forced to evolve with it. Up next is number 5 p.m. Dawn. And this one? It wasn't metaphorical, it wasn't subliminal, it was real-life chaos, front and center on a New York stage in 1992. This wasn't about diss tracks or clever bars, it was about presence. And KRS-One didn't just make a point, he made history. It started with one sentence, one interview. Prince B of PM Dawn, a group known for their ethereal, R&B-laced hip-hop, casually questioned KRS-One's role in the culture. KRS-One wants to be a teacher, but a teacher of what? He asked in a music magazine. Now, for most artists, that might have just been brushed off as another opinion in a sea of media takes, but not for KRS-One, because for him, being the teacher wasn't a title light, was an identity. It was his life's work. He didn't just rap educated. He didn't just perform, he preached. So when Prince B threw shade at that title, KRS didn't respond with a diss track. He responded with action. At a Manhattan venue later that year, PM Dawn was mid-performance when KRS-One and his Boogie Down Productions crew stormed the stage. Not metaphorically, literally. They pulled PM Dawn off, took over the mic, and without missing a beat, launched into South Bronx, a battle cry from the early days of his beef with the Juice Crew. Fans in the audience? Stunned. Some cheered, others stared in disbelief. This wasn't just hip-hop beef, it was hip-hop history being made in real time. Years later, KRS-One didn't hide from the story. On the Combat Jack show, he recounted it coolly. They dissed me in a magazine. I didn't diss them back. I showed up. That quote still floats around hip-hop forums and Reddit threads. One user wrote, "That was the most gangsta nerd moment in rap ever." And it's true because this wasn't street beef. It was calculated retaliation, delivered by someone who believed hip-hop needed to be protected. The fallout? It was brutal for PM Dawn. Their credibility took a hit they never recovered from. Though their songs Set Adrift on Memory Bliss had top charts and earned mainstream love, the streets never fully embraced them, and after that night, the cultural tide shifted against them. Their soft, introspective soundings, praised as innovative, was suddenly viewed as too soft for the hard-edged world of early 90s hip-hop. To be fair, not everyone saw KRS-One's actions as justified. Critics accused him of bullying. Some even said he used his influence to silence a smaller group for the sake of ego. But supporters argued that it wasn't about ego, it was about preservation. In their view, PM Dawn's questioning of KRS's purpose was symbolic of a growing disrespect for the architects of the culture. See, this was more than a clash between two artists. It was a collision between two philosophies. PM Dawn represented a softer, genre-blending future one where rap could embrace vulnerability and melody. KRS-One stood for the foundation where rhymes were tools for revolution and battles were part of the curriculum. This moment became a line in the sand. It warned younger artists that hip-hop wasn't just a trend you could ride, it was a community you had to earn your place in. And the gatekeepers? They weren't letting just anyone walk through without answering for their words. Even now, decades later, that confrontation is referenced in think pieces and documentaries as one of the boldest moments in rap history. Not because it was violent, but because it reminded everyone that in hip-hop, words matter, reputation matters. And when you question someone like KRS-One, you better be ready for the response. Because once the teacher enters the room, class is always in session. Which brings us to number 4, LL Cool J. This one wasn't explosive, it was calculated. No punches thrown, no screaming matches on radio. Just a long, slow burn between two titans of hip-hop, each representing opposite ends of what the culture could be. On one side, you had LL Cool J, smooth, stylish, and a pioneer in his own right, but one who embraced the spotlight. He had the chains, the muscles, and the radio-friendly hooks. LL wasn't just a rapper, he was a brand. By the early 90s, he'd already become a household name, crossing into TV, movies, and fashion. He was hip-hop's first true sex symbol. But KRS-One, he was the street professor, the battle rap legend, the man with a mic and a mission. He didn't care about the Hollywood light, she cared about the movement. To KRS, hip-hop was supposed to challenge challenge the system, not entertain it. It was supposed to speak truth to power, not flirt with it. So when LL Cool J once said in an interview, "I don't need approval from philosophers in street clothes," many saw that as a subliminal at KRS-One. And while LL never mentioned names, the streets knew. And KRS, he clapped back just as subtly, telling reporters, "Being the best MC don't mean having the most jewelry." The tension between them was never loud, but it was thick. At award shows, they'd avoid eye contact. In magazines, they'd speak in coded language. Whenever the debate about real hip-hop came up, their names were often thrown into the ring. Fans debated it relentlessly in street corners, in barbershops, and later in internet forums. For one generation, LL Cool J was the definition of success, a rap star who made it out and stayed fly. For another, KRS-One was the conscience of the culture, the MC who never sold out, who kept it raw and revolutionary. Behind the scenes, mutual respect simmered beneath the surface. They never disrespected each other outright, but their careers constantly mirrored the debate within hip-hop itself. Is this about style or substance, showbiz or struggle? LL Cool J's tracks like "I Need Love" and "Around the Way Girl" were hits, but also drew criticism for being too soft at the time. Meanwhile, KRS-One was releasing tracks like "Sound of the Police," attacking the very systems that allowed LL's fame to flourish. Even in business, the divide continued. LL aligned himself with labels, Hollywood producers, and executives who saw hip-hop as the next big thing. KRS, on the other hand, stayed with independent projects, grassroots tours, and lecture circuits. Their feud, if you could even call it, that was one of the most subtle and dignified in hip-hop history. There were no headlines, no fights, just a battle of principles that played out across decades of interviews, tracks, and appearances. And yet, that quiet war had one of the loudest impacts. It forced fans to choose sides. It forced hip-hop to define itself not just by sound, but by philosophy. It asked, who owns the culture? The one who entertains or the one who educates? Even today, in retrospectives and documentaries, the contrast between LL Cool J and KRS-One still sparks discussion because they weren't just artists, they were archetypes. Two paths diverging in the world of rap, and somewhere in that tension, hip-hop grew up. Now at number 3, Black Poet. When people talk about the Bridge Wars, they usually stop at MC Shan. But that war had aftershocks, and one of the loudest came from Black Poet, a raw voice straight out of Queensbridge. Back in 1987, the beef between Boogie Down Productions and the Juice Crew was cooling down. But Black Poet and producer Rockwell Noel weren't done. They reignited the flames with a scathing diss track called Beat You Down. This wasn't just a few jabs, it was a full-on lyrical assault against KRS-One and everything he stood for. The opening lines alone told you they weren't holding back. And the name of the track, Beat You Down, that wasn't just a metaphor, it was a promise. In interviews, Black Poet later said, "We were the secret behind the Juice Crew." He wasn't trying to settle old scores, he was trying to finish them. This wasn't just a music beef, it was borough warfare. Queensbridge versus the South Bronx. Concrete reputations were on the line. Crews weren't just writing rhymes, they were patrolling neighborhood. There were real altercations in the streets. Rumors spread about face-offs in Queens and clubs shutting down when both sides showed up. The tension wasn't just felt in the lyrics, it was in the air. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to realize what KRS-One represented at the time. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a rising intellectual force. He had already dismantled MC Shan and the iconic "The Bridge Is Over," and BDP was viewed as untouchable. But then came this new voice, Black Poet, who didn't flinch, who clapped back, who dared to challenge the teacher. What made this beef even more intense was its generational nature. Black Poet was younger, hungrier, and determined to keep the Queensbridge name alive in the war. And even though he wasn't one of the original Juice Crew members, his presence in the feud became just as iconic. He extended the narrative, kept the fight going. But as time passed, something unexpected happened. Years later, after the dust settled and the rap game evolved, KRS-One and Black Poet found themselves in the same rooms again, this time not as enemies, but as collaborators. In one of hip-hop's greatest full-circle moments, they actually worked on music together. Poet even said he forced KRS to diss him back on record like it was part of the ritual. There's something poetic about that. Two warriors from rival boroughs who once aimed bars and fists at each other, ending up sharing a mic. They laughed about the past, talked about how wild it all was. But back in '87, it was war. A war over pride, turf, and the soul of hip-hop. The The beef between KRS-One and Black Poet might not have the mainstream visibility of his feuds with Nelly or LL Cool J, but to the real heads, it's one of the most essential chapters in the evolution of New York hip-hop. It showed that rap wasn't just music, it was identity. And for KRS-One, Queensbridge wasn't just a rival, it was a battlefield he had to survive. Next is number 2, X-Clan. Now, this wasn't about record sales or who had the hardest bars. This was different. This was ideological. KRS-One and X-Clan weren't beefing over the charts, they were battling over beliefs. At the core of this clash was a war of philosophies, and in hip-hop, that can be more explosive than any diss track. X-Clan, with their unmistakable Egyptian ink chains and powerful, militant, Afrocentric imagery, were on a mission. Their music wasn't just beats and rhymes, it was protest, education, and revolution. Their leader, Professor X, son of activist Sonny Carson, was a commanding presence. Their message? Uplift black people through black nationalism, spiritual symbolism, and a fierce rejection of cultural assimilation. Every verse from them was soaked in unapologetic black power. Now, KRS-One? He was also rooted in black consciousness, but he leaned toward a universalist, pan-human approach. He once famously declared, "I am hip-hop. Not we, not our people, just I." That rubbed X-Clan the wrong way. To them, that wasn't unity, that was ego. That was an abandonment of the collective struggle. They called him Captain Human, a sarcastic dig at his spiritual and metaphysical approach, which they saw as watered-down activism. The clash boiled over in public interviews and lyrics, with both sides throwing intellectual shade. But things took a darker turn when the threat of violence entered the picture. According to DJ Kenny Parker, tensions escalated so sharply that a peace summit had to be called by none other than Africa Bambaataa. The location? Bronx River. The stakes? A potential blowout between two of hip-hop's most passionate camps. Parker recalled that both crews were searched for weapons before entering. Think about that. Two rap collectives known for consciousness, poetry, and empowerment being patted down like gang rivals before a diplomatic sit-down. That tells you how real it got. And according to KRS-One, he didn't come to that meeting to apologize, he came to set the record straight. On his track Build and Destroy, he rapped, "They had to apologize to me at a summit in Bronx River." That bar wasn't just clever, it was historical. After that summit, the beef, it vanished. X-Clan never dissed him again, but the residue of that clash remained. Hip-hop had always balanced identity, politics, and performance, but this battle showed just how sharp the ideological lines could get. It wasn't about bars, it was about belief systems. About whether hip-hop should prioritize black nationalism or global spiritualism. Should it speak to a people or all people? This moment didn't just shape KRS-One's career, it defined an era. An era when rappers weren't just entertainers, but philosophers, warriors, and revolutionaries. And when they clashed, it wasn't just about ego, it was about whose truth would be heard louder. It also marked a shift in how ideological rifts played out in hip-hop. Unlike petty feuds or competitive battles, this wasn't about lyrical superiority, it was about which worldview deserved the mic. And for KRS-One, proving that his voice represented something bigger meant facing criticism not just from his rivals, but from parts of the community that once stood with him. In a 1995 lecture, KRS-One addressed the growing distance between black nationalist movements and broader spiritual movements in hip-hop. "There's truth in many forms," he said, "but I'll never apologize for speaking to all humanity." That line reflected his unwavering position. He wasn't backing down from universalism, even when it made him a target. Meanwhile, X-Clan continued to push a more focused, culturally specific message. Their iconic track, "Heed the Word of the Brother," became an anthem for unapologetic black empowerment, while KRS dropped tracks like "Ah Yeah" and "Reality" that spoke to spiritual elevation across racial boundaries. This philosophical face-off never turned violent, thanks to intervention and mutual respect, but it left an imprint. Hip-hop heads today still debate, should the art form serve the struggle of one community, or should it aim to unite all? The answer depends on who you ask. But one thing's for sure, when KRS-One clashed with X-Clan, it wasn't just a moment in rap, it was a moment in cultural identity. And finally, number 1, the notorious B.I.G. This is the beef that almost was. One that could have set off a war between two lyrical titans at the peak of hip-hop's golden era, but instead, it became one of the genre's most powerful what-ifs, and it all started with a misquote. According to DJ Kenny Parker, the drama began when a Canadian magazine falsely quoted the notorious Biggie as saying, "KRS-One, I don't like him, eat it." For KRS and his Boogie Down Productions crew, that wasn't just tabloid trash, it was disrespect at the highest level. And knowing KRS-One's history of never backing down from a challenge, his camp was ready to respond with full lyrical firepower. The tension was real. KRS had never beefed with Biggie before, but the weight of that quote was heavy. In an era where lyrical disses turned into real-world conflict, this could have ended very differently. But fate stepped in. At a club event not long after, Biggie Smalls approached Kenny Parker, KRS's brother and DJ. No entourage, no drama, just honesty. He clarified, "I said I didn't like the 'I am hip-hop' line, but that other stuff? I never said that." Just like that, the air shifted. Tension melted into understanding. Biggie didn't double down. He didn't try to spin it. He cleared the slate like a man. In fact, he even joked, "Yo man, I need some beats." What could have been a volatile collision turned into mutual respect. Think about that. Two giants of the culture, both lyrical, both respected, both proud, staring down the barrel of a potential feud, and instead of firing shots, they shook hands. But here's where the story turns bittersweet. Just weeks after that interaction, Biggie was gone. March 9, 1997, murdered in Los Angeles. Never got that beat. Never got that verse with KRS. And just like that, a potential battle turned into a haunting silence. Fans still wonder what a real battle between the Blastmaster and the King of Brooklyn could have sounded like. Would it have elevated the genre or burned it down? We'll never know. But what we do know is that it added another complex layer to KRS-One's legacy. In hip-hop, sometimes the loudest moments are the ones that didn't happen. And this almost beef with the notorious Biggie, remains one of the most intriguing. Not because of the bars exchanged, but because of the ones that weren't. Because two real ones chose respect over ego, peace over pride. And in a culture built on battles, that might be the hardest move of all. Now here's the twist no one saw coming. Despite decades of lyrical wars, philosophical beefs, and even physical confrontations, KRS-One doesn't hold grudges, at least not anymore. In a 2024 panel discussion in Harlem, he said, "The people I beefed with were my teachers too. They sharpened my sword. That's how iron sharpens iron." Some he forgave, some forgave him. Some he never even hated, he just challenged them to be better. That's what makes this story so iconic. It's not just about rap battles, it's about a man who took pain, ego, and pride and turned it into purpose. But here's the question that still haunts fans. If KRS could bury the hatchet with even his fiercest enemies, what would have happened if Biggie had lived? What do you think? Drop your thoughts below and stick around for the next one.